In 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, over 1 million podcasts were launched. Many of these podcasts are no longer active, but Megan Sprinkle's podcast, Vet Life Reimagined, is still going from strength to strength. She's been able to leverage the power of podcasting to raise her profile within her industry, grow her following, and bring connecting conversations to a community of veterinary professionals. In this episode, we cover how Megan has leveraged her podcast to become more known in her field, how she got one of her episodes in front of 30,000 plus viewers on YouTube, her show notes and title writing tricks, the benefits of bringing in out-of-sector guests to your show, the schedule that Megan uses to ensure she gets an episode out each week, monetizing a podcast through YouTube, and plenty more. So sit back and discover how you can use a podcast to raise your profile within your industry. Hi Megan, thanks for joining me on Podcasting Amplified. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah. So for the audience, Megan Sprinkle, she's a doctor of veterinary medicine and she's applied her skills to podcasting as well. She hosts Vet Life Reimagined, which is a veterinary podcast consisting of conversations with professionals in the industry who follow their North Star and curiosity to thrive in veterinary medicine. So how long have you been in the profession for?
This is my 10-year anniversary from graduating vet school. So officially as a veterinarian, 10 years. Yes.
Cool. And then how long down that path did you decide to make content? And was it always going to be a podcast, or is there any reason specifically why you chose podcasting?
Yeah. So my podcast story actually is a pandemic story. Maybe a lot of people's podcast stories start somewhere around the pandemic. But so I'm a pretty non-traditional veterinarian. I did specialize. So I specialized in nutrition. And right out of my residency, I went into what we call industry, which is I worked for a big company, like Royal Canin was the company I went to work for. So that actually may cover a very wide audience because Royal Canin is international. But so very different than working inside of a clinic. And I did that because I really liked the people aspect of veterinary medicine, which also might sound weird because you might hear a lot of vets say, I want to be a vet because I don't like people. I want to, go play with animals. But I really love the people and I wanted to make a bigger impact. So I went down this path. And in the middle of the pandemic was really when a lot of the challenges that were going on in the veterinary industry really kind of blew up because they're a medical facility. So kind of like in human medicine, they had to be at work and taking on a lot of cases. So what was already kind of going on in veterinary medicine with burnout, compassion fatigue, and all of those things, it just amplified. And so a lot of people, whether they were in clinics or even in different industries, they really wanted to know what else was a possibility for them, because people that get into veterinary medicine are really passionate about what we do. Because, that's just the type of people it attracts. And so it is really hard to start to feel like you're losing your why. And so I would talk with all these individuals and I realized that they had no idea all the different things that they could do being a veterinary professional. So that was the inspiration for the podcast, was to show people all the different career paths that you could do and bring all these people in the profession to kind of bring inspiration and encouragement and kind of start to form this community feel again. And why a podcast was also in the pandemic was when I started to love listening to podcasts. I became a junkie during the pandemic. I still am. Listened to lots of different podcasts. And because I just fell in love with the platform, I thought, what a great way to connect with an audience. It's just a very unique way of connecting. And so that was the birth of Vet Life Reimagined.
Yeah, I can see how it would be the kind of profession where talking to each other is really important because of, I can't imagine the sort of mental toll with professions like that. And you say it was a sort of a pandemic-born podcast, but the good thing is that it's still going, obviously. And
yes.
I think that's what a lot of people struggled with when they had the time, they were producing content, and then they go back to work and start pod fading. Even if they might have been able to squeeze it in somewhere, it's just you don't have quite so much, mental tolerance and bandwidth to squeeze all that in with the editing and planning and everything. So were you still working through the pandemic for most of it, or?
Yes, I did have the luxury of having a remote job. So pandemic started, they sent us all home from the office, and I have been a remote worker ever since, actually. So I did have that advantage to not have transportation time or things like that to detract from the abilities to do other things.
Yeah. So when the pandemic ended and when things started opening back up again and things, did it make it harder to carry on with the podcast, or was it kind of, you just kept on with your routine?
I kept it on. So it's still a lot of work. And you talked about when people have to go back to work or they just don't have as much free time anymore, it's going to get harder. And I'm already foreseeing that for myself. So hopefully we could talk a little bit about, maybe even share tips here as I try to make it even more streamline or delegate more so that I can continue to enjoy this, because that's the terrible thing is you don't never want to stop enjoying it and still continue to do why you started in the first place. So yes, I have kept keeping on with the podcast.
Yeah. And while we're on that, what does your routine look like? Because I can see you put a lot of effort in. It's not like you're just recording the audio and sticking it up there. I can tell that it's edited. You've got nice sort of show notes and unique titles for each episode. You put the videos up on YouTube. So what does your routine look like, Hannah? How much time do you reckon you spend each week on it?
Yeah. The part that is really inconsistent is scheduling the interviews. Because I'm interviewing veterinary professionals, I really want to work with their schedule. And I get, in my world, like celebrity type veterinarians sometimes too. So I'm just like, whenever you have time, we will make it work. So that part is pretty inconsistent. However, I do know that I have the highest energy that I can give if it's earlier in the week or at least earlier in the day. So I do try to aim, if I have some flexibility, for times that I know that I can bring a little bit of more energy from my side. And everything else is not everybody has to do this. It's okay. I get up very early. So I will actually sometimes start working on editing or, writing out the LinkedIn newsletter, because every episode I will write a LinkedIn newsletter for as part of the marketing for it. So I kind of capitalize my mornings. That's also when I am better at myself. Like I said, I'm a morning person. And then everything else I try to keep at the weekend. Now, if we are traveling on the weekend, again, I usually know that in advance and can be working along the way. So I don't have to rely on the weekend, but a lot of it is actually on the weekend.
Yeah, it can definitely leak into the weekend sometimes. But no, that's good. And I know what you mean about guests. Like, it's sort of the one bit that you can't control. So you do all the editing yourself, do you?
Yes, right now.
What does your workflow kind of look like? Because that's sort of my thing. Like, my background is in audio. So what are you using to edit, and how long does it take? And over the years, has it gotten quicker?
Yes, it has started to get a little bit quicker, and my tools have recently changed. So that has helped as well. So for the majority of, we're coming up on 2 years now, I have been using Final Cut Pro for editing, which is a fantastic tool. Again, I've learned on it. I've had fun with it. But recently, as of like last month, I have purchased Descript as a new tool, which also is allowing me to kind of upscale my video as well, because I have been recording on Zoom. And so I'm hoping that will also kind of increase some video quality and things as well. But Descript has also helped me edit a little bit faster as well. I'm continuing to learn the tool, so I still have a lot of learning for Descript. That's something else you got to think about as well, as you have to learn how to use these tools. So you have to kind of find time in your schedule to look at YouTube videos and tutorials and things to actually learn your tools. I did have an advantage when I started because my husband, one, he's an IT engineer and he had been on YouTube for a while. So he, like, if I ever got stuck, Mike could come and kind of get me unstuck to keep me going. But I definitely know that that could be super frustrating if, you're doing really well, but then the platform does something crazy and you don't know where to go. And, that can really slow you down. So kind of thinking about that too, is you got to learn all these tools before you can actually get good and faster.
Yeah, of course. Especially if you're changing from, Final Cut to Descript or something else that's quite a different workflow. And how have things changed over the last 2 years in terms of your goals for the podcast? I know we talked about it at the beginning, but has anything changed at all in your ambitions now that you've seen, you're getting listeners in? Has anything changed in that area?
Yeah. I really would love to make this one a little bit bring in more people to help me run it so that I can make it more sustainable to continue forever and wherever. But I also see this has brought me a lot of opportunities, just having the podcast. It has gotten me known. And a lot of that is because, of course, the marketing on top of it. So posting on LinkedIn, which is where my audience is, I have established a pretty decent following there. And so I just got back from a veterinary conference in January, and I would see people that I've admired on LinkedIn, and they knew me because they saw me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I had somebody call me a public veterinarian because I post on LinkedIn. So just having that platform and, making these connections with the guest, posting about it, that has opened up a lot of opportunities that I hope to continue to explore. Because I think one of the best parts of podcasting is the relationship piece of it, whether it's the connecting with your guest, connecting with your audience. I think that is the most rewarding aspect that I have found in podcasting. So I think that kind of opens up a lot of possibilities for you depending on what direction you want to take it. So that's a big one. But also I am getting more people interested in sponsoring the podcast. So that's great. That's the funds that I need to get, an editor to come in and help with time so that I can use that time in other areas to grow it. So that's another big goal this year, is to build partnerships to financially help the podcast.
Yeah. That's really, really good to hear that it's getting some traction in that way. I think it's especially it's a running theme with other podcasters I talk to and my clients and things, people with interview podcasts. I know people get hung up on the numbers and things, but those things that you can't measure, like the relationships you're forming, especially with an interview podcast, I think is even more powerful a lot of the time.
Being a very small niche podcast, because my audience is the veterinary profession, it isn't necessarily about the numbers. I have to remind myself that sometimes too, because you hear people brag about numbers. But if you're looking for sponsorships, if you have a niche audience, you just have to find the sponsors who want that niche audience. And then it's not as much about millions of downloads. It's about how influential are you in that niche audience that they're looking for, which is exactly what one of the sponsors told me yesterday when we were chatting, was that we can tell that you've really built this relationship and people listen to you and look up to you. So that's really what they're looking for a lot of times.
Yeah. So I was going to say actually about being in such a niche space, it makes it a little bit easier to stand out as well when people are recognizing you and things like that. And you mentioned sometimes you went to the conference. You said before the call you also went to Podfest as well.
Yes.
What was that all about? So for anyone who doesn't know, Podfest in Orlando, Florida, you said, wasn't it?
Yeah, Podfest is becoming bigger and bigger. They celebrated their 10th anniversary this year, and they even had a big podcaster award that actually decided to partner with them this year too. It was a separate ticket, but big deal that it brought even more people and bigger podcasters in. But it is really targeted for the independent podcaster. We have some other conferences that are a little bit more industrial. So like more of the people in podcasting businesses, like selling platforms and things like that, those are kind of different conferences. This is really trying to attract the independent podcasters. So it's a very relaxed environment. Everybody is extremely nice. That is something they're very proud of, is that atmosphere of everybody just being very nice to each other and encouraging. That's something I actually like about the podcasting community, is I've always found podcasters are extremely nice and to each other and encouraging. Yeah. And I think part of it is because people who listen to podcasts rarely listen to just one. So there's not as much competition as you may think, right? So I think the average person listens to 8 podcasts now. It used to be 7, it's going up, but 8 podcasts. So it's really an opportunity to even build relationships with other podcasters, to like know what your goals are and find somebody who's achieved it. And people are really, really open to helping. So it's a really fun, very fun conference.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because I went to the podcast show in the UK, and the first times I was doing those kind of networking events, despite what you say is true, everyone being so friendly, I feel like starting that conversation can be quite difficult. What was the sort of overall goal of going there? Was it just to meet other podcasters? I guess there were talks and things to learn from.
Well, and maybe it's because we're in the southeast of the United States and we're also really friendly down here. So maybe that's another reason. But great question, because I try to do that every time I go to a conference, whether it's veterinary or podcasting, is really sit down and think about, what do I want to get out of this conference? And actually, I took my husband this year too, so I was able to talk with him. He had slightly different interests as well. He being a tech person, he really wanted to get to the expo hall where he could see all the new tech that's available, which sadly we were told we were their best customer. So we might have bought a few things. Yeah. So he was really interested in learning more of the tech side of the industry, including cameras, because again, he's big into YouTube. And then for me, when I talked about being interested in sponsorships, so I did go to a lot of the monetization focused talks and things like that. So that was a big goal for me, as well as I mentioned, I had just bought Descript. So I also went to the talks that taught how to use Descript. So I was like, yay, I haven't even had time to watch YouTube videos about this. So it was fantastic to have dedicated time.
Yeah, that's great. Now I can relate to what you said about your husband. I can talk about microphones for hours, I think, and gear, things like that. Yeah, that's cool. So, and just circling back to, I was talking about your content. You put together your show notes and titles and things like that. And yeah, they look like they could grab someone's attention. It's not just sort of, I think the trap that sometimes interview podcasts fall into is where the title will just be the name of the guest or something like that. Do you have any tips you can share, or just explain how you choose your titles and how you put your show notes together?
There are faster ways of doing it, but a lot of times my show notes come from my intro. So I start by taking my intro that I have recorded, and of course I've written out, and that's kind of my starting place. And then I just make them a little bit more like in a bullet point form, so it's easier to just kind of skim through, so not as dense. So that's kind of how I start with my show notes. And then I really like providing a lot of resources, whether it's from the guest, but now I've gotten to the point where, like for my audio show notes, I want to link to the YouTube video version, or I want to link to a similar episode that someone could also go listen to next. So I think about those things as well, kind of that mindset of how do I keep them, staying and keep them interested? Because especially when you have a lot of episodes, they're like, well, that one was cool, but your last one was kind of different. So if I really liked this one, where should I go next? So I really try to help there too. So I think about that in the show notes. And of course, you can use AI as well for trying to do your show notes. And I think maybe in Descript, there might be some tools as well. Again, still exploring. But with titles, I use a couple different things. One, I try to think about what is a attractive topic that we've discussed that might draw attention. But there are a couple of different tools. So YouTube, there's actually where you can ask YouTube to use AI to generate your title. So it'll take what was in your show notes, and even if you kind of started a title, it will give you 3 different options. And if you don't like any of them, you can actually say try again. So YouTube is a good place to kind of have an internal little chat GPT that can help you find good titles. The other thing that I do is in YouTube. So again, a lot of this is starting in YouTube. Is I go to my keywords and I put in keywords and I try to find what I'm ranking high for. And that will let me know, okay, I need to probably make sure I have those phrases in my show notes and try to find one of those higher level ones in the actual title itself. And then I can translate that over to the audio hosting platform as well. So there's a lot of different things I can use. It's just kind of like which one aligns with what I like and what everything else is kind of telling me through statistics what might more likely be successful.
Yeah. No, that's cool. We kind of YouTube first approach. I think some podcasters, if they went onto YouTube, if they hadn't started on YouTube yet, and they're just used to whatever podcast host they have, especially if it's a more basic one like Spotify for podcasters or something, they'd be quite surprised at the features that are available for creators on YouTube in comparison. Like, it's just, for a free platform, it just kind of blows every podcast host out the water, really, in terms of
Yes.
the keyword features, the fact that they're sort of incorporating AI into it now, and the analytics and everything on there is really good.
That's actually one of my favorite parts about YouTube is the analytic features. The only challenge is that you do have to have a certain amount of content before it will actually give you very many analytics. So for the first bit, it was really frustrating because it wasn't giving me anything because it didn't have enough data to go off of. But now, again, almost 2 years into this and enough traction, I definitely have enough where it'll tell me the best time to post and like when my audience is more active, all those types of things like I had been wanting, because some of this is a guess. So you just kind of have to start somewhere that makes sense for you and then and hope it works. But yeah, YouTube has been very helpful.
Yeah, you do have to make some assumptions, don't you? And it's quite addictive, like tracking your analytics on there and seeing how your content makes people tick. Have you seen much traction on there compared to your audio only, or are you getting more listens on your audio only feed?
Yeah, it is definitely different. And I'm pretty sure that the audiences are probably different as well. Some of my audio listeners, I think, are probably older. And I have a lot of true fans through the audio version. So I would never let that go because I think, again, it's just a lot easier to form that cool relationship through audio. But with YouTube, that one finally took off. Again, that one was slower for me because I only have so much time. So I edit for audio, even though I've recorded video. So I'm not really worried about the cuts. I realized I watch like famous YouTubers and they cut their scenes, where it's kind of glitchy. So I didn't worry about that anymore. And then I just put B-roll on top of it to make it engaging. But that is all the time I have. I do not have any extra time to go in and cut it all up and do that. So I put it in. And so these are really long episodes for someone just to sit and consume without, really being interested in the topic. So it took a long time for it to kind of catch on, but I had especially one particular video that for me went viral. And so that helped a lot that YouTube decided, oh, okay, people are clicking, so let's share more of our videos. And I have been getting subscribers much more consistently and faster. Again, when I first started, I was like, I'm never going to get to 1,000 subscribers at this rate. But then it starts to kind of hockey stick where it starts to kind of catch on and you go a lot faster. So I think I have actually seen faster growth on YouTube right now. Again, faster at the beginning with audio. Now I'm getting faster on YouTube. I think it's nice because YouTube's a search engine, so it helps people find you. And in audio, it's really hard to do that without a lot of extra work. So
Yeah. So you monetized then on YouTube?
not yet, no.
Okay.
So and YouTube changes. So
Yeah.
look at what's the most update. But to get monetized, you have to have 1,000 subscribers, and I think it's like 400,000 hours within a year or something like that.
4,000 hours watch time, I think. Yeah.
4,000 hours.
Yeah.
And then a new feature, though, if this is interesting, is once you get to 500 subscribers, you can actually start a community, which is another opportunity that you can reach before even 1,000. So depending on what your goals are, then that could actually be pretty attractive as well in YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it's one sort of monetization thing that maybe some podcasters aren't thinking about, the monetization on YouTube, because you can literally just put your podcast episodes up there. And once you're monetized, obviously it's going to take a while and a lot of commitment, but you just get paid without having to put ads in at all. So it's just one extra stream of income, which is great. Yeah. And you say that one of your videos went viral. Was that a full episode or was that like a short or something that you cut out?
That was a full episode. It was during a very busy time for me. And so I was not watching my analytics as closely. And all of a sudden, I think my husband actually said something about it. And he's like, man, you're getting subscribers a lot faster. And so I went and I looked in, and it was that video had taken off. And again, I haven't looked in a little while, but it was well over 20-something thousand, which I think that like the definition of viral is a certain times higher than your normal. And so technically that was viral for me. And so, yeah, that's kind of what really started to kick off the channel and much faster growth. People are actually finding it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think viral also depends on the type of content, like 20,000 for where you are and 20,000 views for a full length podcast episode is a challenge. Like it's much easier to get a 3-minute video to go viral than an hour long one. That is really impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And speaking again about your content and your titles, I think the one I was drawn to when I looked through your feed was, I think it was How to Calm an Angry Person in Under 90 Seconds. Is that the title? Yeah. So that's like, it's really specific on what the listener's going to get out of it, which I like. And also, obviously, it's something that could be useful for anybody who's working with people, which is about just about anybody. So I listened through that, and that was interesting. And it also, obviously, it wasn't a veterinary professional that you were speaking to in that one, which is interesting. So how many of those episodes have you put together? Did you know this person before, or did you just think, like, trying to think around the subject, who else could be beneficial to your audience? Yeah.
So you're right. That is I think it's the first episode that I had done with someone who really had very little connection to the veterinary industry. So that was the title of one of his taglines. And so I did kind of steal his tagline a bit there. Okay. But yeah, I did. So I know the challenges in my industry. And when I saw what he did, I could say, wow, what you do, what you teach is a huge challenge in the veterinary industry. So I was like, come share your story. And it's interesting because it kind of changes things up. And I am a huge advocate. I'm trying to do this more and more, that an industry really needs diversity of perspectives to get better and grow more. And so if I'm the one to do it, then here we go, because I love learning from everyone. That's why the podcasts that I listen to are really diverse. And I think that's so important. I'm speaking for the veterinary industry, but I'm pretty confident to say I think every industry can learn from people with very different backgrounds. So that was one of the first times I've actually done that, where it was a very different background for my guest. But I'm glad to hear that it was interesting. And you're right. I think anybody could listen to that episode. And yes, we did try to phrase, some examples for the veterinary industry, but anybody could get wonderful value out of it.
Yeah. And you could go into that interview knowing what the topic was going to be, that focus. Do you normally have a particular focus with your guests? And are you normally approaching them, or do they tend to approach you now?
Still majority that I'm approaching them, but more and more people are reaching out. So what I really like to do, if I have never met this person before, even if I've followed them on LinkedIn, I do try to have a 30-minute pre-call. And my goal for that pre-call is to build rapport. So, laid back conversation, getting to know each other. I usually give my little 3-minute spiel of why I started this podcast and who the audience is. But also within that interview, I want to know what they are most passionate about, what could they talk about forever, right? Like, what is something that they're really passionate about? And so once I can hit those keys, then I know that once we start into the interview, like where I want to make sure I drive the conversation. So I have my kind of key points based off that pre-call.
Yeah, no, that's good. Rather than just sort of driving them down a set path that you go through every single guest with. That's good.
Yep.
So you talked about monetization and getting sponsors. Is that something that you're hoping to grow more of in 2024? Are you looking to grow this more into a business, or is it always sort of more like a side thing?
Yeah, I'm open to see where it goes. I have a couple business ideas that I think it wouldn't be direct. But again, when you have a platform and people start to know who you are and your diverse range of abilities, because again, you don't think of a veterinarian hosting a podcast necessarily. So they're out there, but not as many. So I've really built a very vast range of skill sets. And so that kind of opens up a lot of opportunities. I would love to at least get to a point where I can outsource a lot of these different tasks so that I can do more strategy and see if I want to go more of a particular business direction and potentially link that with the podcast. So that's kind of my first goal. Maybe that's a low goal, but one step at a time. I'm lucky that I do have a full-time job. So I can kind of take it slow. And sometimes that can be good to not feel stressed that you have to make this replace your salary super, super fast. I know my husband tried that. It's extremely stressful. So sometimes it's nice to build things slowly. But again, we're getting some great notice and momentum. So I'm a person of possibilities, and that's part of the message, is to stay curious. And I'm really excited where this could probably go.
Cool. Yeah, I know it's important to have goals and not sort of set the bar too low, but at the same time, not thinking that you're going to get rich off it after a few months of posting episodes. What has been like the biggest challenge? What kind of challenges have you faced over the last couple of years with it that you had to sort of get through?
I think the time.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time to get it done. And again, especially the video, while I have really enjoyed the benefits that I have gotten from YouTube, it's a lot of work to that, or at least how I've approached creating the video, which again, I'm putting all this B-roll on throughout the video, which again, these are 45-minute videos. I mean, that B-roll is through the whole thing, but there's a lot of B-roll in some of this. So that takes a lot of time. Now, fortunate for me, it is fun. I enjoy because this allows me this creative outlet to create and build. And I like graphics and things like that. It's not what I went to school for, but I like it.
Yeah.
So it is fun. But again, I mean, this is what I do. I work, I do podcasting. So it would be great to have a little bit more balance and a little bit more time back to, again, to grow it even more. Because that's really it. It was like, I think in life in general, right? You need your team of people where you can delegate things like, I would like someone to do my taxes. I think it's dangerous for me to do my taxes. I don't know. So, finding your team of people that you can kind of do everything better with is really the goal.
Yeah. So editing is obviously quite a straightforward one to hand off, and that saves you a huge amount of time. What else would you consider passing off?
I would love to have someone look at the overall strategy, especially when it comes to marketing, because I think that I'm fortunate that I haven't done everything. There's some people who they're posting on TikTok and Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, Threads and Instagram and Facebook. They're going everywhere. And I haven't done that because I just don't have time. But two, it's really finding who your audience is and where they are.
Yeah.
And so LinkedIn was the main platform. Facebook, I'm trying to do a little bit better because it seems like a lot of veterinary people are on Facebook. But making sure that I am optimizing the marketing plan because it's still a little sporadic. So if I could hire even a VA who could get us both organized and we could kind of delegate and make sure that this was a little bit more automatic or structured, I think that would be also a really big help. So one, making sure that I'm doing what's best for my audience, but also just helping with all that content creation because, you've mentioned it already. Beyond editing, there's the show notes, there's the titles, there's posting it on whatever social media platform you are and making sure that you're watching the responses and answering if people have comments. So there is a lot that kind of goes into this whole process.
Yeah. The marketing one is a challenge. Not just actually doing it, but like you're saying, sort of knowing what to do, what platforms to go on. It's the same for me. Like I focus on LinkedIn and Facebook's pretty good for the groups. I haven't really found anything beneficial about posting on Twitter or X, especially at the moment. I feel like I should just stop looking at it and stop posting stuff on there because I'm not getting any traction on there either. But you kind of feel like you're going to miss out if you've got the content, you might as well post it. But I don't know. That's something I've got to think about myself as well. And you said you use the B-roll, so that's for the whole video, is it?
No. So, I mean, you will still see the video of me and the guest, and there's a couple ways you can try to create movement within the video. And one is basically like zooming in and out on the individual. So if the guest is talking, you may just have the guest on screen and then you zoom out where it's both of us. So I do a little bit of that. But then the B-roll is really to further illustrate what the guest is talking about. So if they said, I used to work for such and such veterinary clinic, well, I'll go and I'll grab a picture of that veterinary clinic so people can see what the clinic looks like. Or I do a lot of innovation. So if somebody is talking about this new AI tool that's coming into animal health, I can go and pull and show, a 4-second clip of them demonstrating this AI tool. So it is really meant to be intentional. So illustrating what the guest is talking about, but it creates more movement that will entertain the person watching. So
yeah, that's really cool. It's a lot of work, obviously, but it's making it into a YouTube video rather than just a podcast that happens to be on YouTube. And
exactly,
you can tell that it's helped because you had one of your videos get 20,000 views, which is brilliant. And then just wrapping up, if there was one thing that you'd wished you'd known when you started the podcast during the pandemic, what would it have been?
Yes, I really like this question. I've been thinking about it a lot. I think one of the things that I wish I had been a little braver to do and known how simple, but how well it works is just speaking what I want a little bit more and sharing it more with my audience and bringing them along because, it almost 2 years in and I'm like, man, it would be really nice to have a sponsor. And then I had someone say, oh yeah, so-and-so who has a podcast, she just put it on Instagram that she was looking for a sponsor and she got one. And I'm like, oh, so you have to ask.
Yeah.
So I think just trying to share my goals and what I'm trying to do a little bit more. And I think things happen when you actually share it. And not only does your audience get to know you a little bit more, but they'll be your little scouts. They might be able to bring you a guest or someone who's going to help you achieve your goals. So I think that is something that I wish that I realized much earlier on in my journey.
Yeah, that's a really good point to finish on because I think everyone can benefit from that, including myself, just asking and not constantly worrying that you're oversharing or that people don't want to know and things like that. But yeah, thank you, Megan, for joining me. It's been really interesting and inspiring that you've kept it going for a couple of years now. And I'm sure the audience is going to get a lot of value from this episode.
Thank you. I hope so.
Thanks, Megan.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.